Hey everybody, welcome back. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're doing on this 21 4Runner. I'm going to do a 3-inch lift from ICON, some C4 front bumpers and rock sliders, Smittybuilt winch, and then some ICON wheels and BFG tires. So I'll give you a quick rundown of what all we're putting on here. So rundown of what we're putting on. First off, we're doing the ICON 2.5 front coilovers with the 700-pound rated springs. This vehicle is going to get that C4 winch bumper and the Smittybuilt winch right there. So we wanted to make sure we had extra weight carrying capacity. We are going to do the tubular control arms with delta joints. I got the dust caps for it, sway bar relocation brackets, and then of course some of the cool looking ICON dust booties for the coilovers themselves. In the rear, we're doing the 3-inch lift springs, also from ICON, adjustable track bar, adjustable lower track bars, or control arms actually, and then the 2.5 rear shocks with the remote reservoirs and adjustable damping. Did that also because this vehicle will have a drawer system and a fridge put in, and they wanted to be able to adjust the damping for different load characteristics when they're just driving without anything in the back and with loaded up in the back. Also put the shin guards, those will go on, that'll protect this lower arm on the shock while they're on the trail or off-road. Then the, like we talked about, the C4 bumper, the 10,000-pound Smittybuilt winch, the C4 rock sliders, which he had powder coated by an outside source, and then the high clearance wings for the front bumper over here. So all of that going on that 21 TRD off-road premium. Stay tuned. This is pretty much how the owner brought the vehicle to me. They'd already installed their roof rack and ladder, forward-facing light bar. So here I am just getting it up on jack stands, getting it ready to pull the wheels off. I decided to do the rear first as it has several more parts and several more steps, being as we were doing the lower trailing arms and the adjustable track bar along with springs. Pretty straightforward as far as disassembly goes. Take off all the old parts, transfer some of the factory rubber pieces over to the aftermarket ones, and then just start the process of reassembly. I did find that the lower trailing arms were easier to install by putting the axle end on first instead of the frame side end. So you can see here where I took them loose, grabbed a ratchet strap, tied it to the axle to give myself a way to pull a little bit of tension to slide the bolt into the frame bracket. I would recommend doing it that way with one person. Now, if you're on a lift or if you got another set of hands, you may be able to do this the other way around, which is the way the instructions say, but I found it easier to do axle end first and then frame bracket side. All right, so I wanted to take a second to show you something that I found on this rear kit. They want you to drill a hole in the frame to mount the reservoirs for the rear shocks. And I got to looking, and it looks like there's already holes there. So what I did is I got one of these little tools right here. I've had this. And it puts these little threaded inserts in. And then what that does is it crushes that down. It takes that knurled area and it locks it into that hole. So now what we've got is a threaded hole. And then I took a stainless bolt, lock washer, and now got a threaded hole in the frame that I can put my bracket on to mount the reservoir to. Didn't have to drill anything. So I would highly recommend you get one of the nutser tools. And then over here on the driver's side, there appears to be a hole right there in the frame already. and it has threads in it. So now I just got to find a bolt that fits those threads. So it looks like on a 21 model, you may not have to do any drilling after all. So the instructions say to take and put the heat shrink on these hose clamps so they don't scratch up your reservoirs. So we'll have to undo these. You unscrew this until the strap comes loose. Slide this on. And we're going to do it with the tighter fit. So we're going to take our heat gun and we're going to heat this up and make it look nice. So now that they're all heat shrunk, we'll just have to trim these ends off a little bit so we can get some of the threads, so to speak, back into the loops and put them back on the clamps. Here's a quick shot of mounting the remote reservoirs on the passenger side. What I did is, of course, had the bracket mounted to the frame, used my hose clamps around that bracket, and then I just kind of laid it in there to where that hose mimicked the curve of the frame itself. And then after it was all said and done, I wound up putting the one bracket hose clamp holder, whatever you want to call it, across the middle there. Pretty much same process for the driver's side. Just mount the reservoir to the bracket that's bolted to the frame, and then use the provided cable clamp and self-tapping bolt to secure it to the body. So after buttoning up all the major components, just putting all the auxiliary brackets for parking brake and so on, started putting the sway bar end links on and noticed that they have a pretty extreme angle. So the owner of the vehicle and I came up with a plan to use some M10 by 1.25 thread couplers, jam nuts, and some longer bolts to extend the end links about 1.5 inches, which gave us a whole lot better angle, and I guess we'll find out if they're strong enough. If not, there are aftermarket options, but they're quite a bit more expensive and seem to be a little bit overkill, in my opinion. I didn't record the driver's side coilover going in, but here's the passenger side being done. Fairly straightforward on these, a whole lot less components compared to the rear. Basically take out the old one, reinstall the new one. It comes with bolts instead of having studs. The only thing that's remotely tricky is getting that long bolt fished out of the upper control arm, as there are some components under the hood you have to kind of work around. Other than that, it's pretty easy. Take it apart, put it back together. Next up was to modify the front bumper cover to clear the C4 Fab winch bumper mount. Pretty much take all your fasteners out, remove the cover. You're going to remove the aluminum crash bar and the 2 steel crash bar extensions. You'll trim the 2 plastic panels on either side of the radiator opening, and then you can use the factory hardware to mount the C4 bumper back to the frame directly. Next up was to actually cut the bumper cover. C4 Fab has some instructional videos on their website that tell you the measurements you need. I used a 3-inch cut-off saw to do the big cuts, and then eventually got a air-powered body saw for the more intricate cuts. It's not really imperative that you're super straight with this, as they do tuck behind the bumper, but you definitely want to cut thicker than you need, so you can always trim it back some. It goes pretty quick, stuff cuts pretty easily, and when it's all said and done, you may want to get a box cutter or a razor knife and go around and trim up the edges like I do here in just a sec. So once you're satisfied with the cuts and you've got the fitment just the way you want around the C4 winch bumper, C4 says that if you have the TSS with the radar cruise sensor made into the grill, that the bumper itself needs to be mounted as high as possible. So here I've taken it off, finished mounting the winch to it, and then reinstalled the bumper at the height of its adjustment. So after the final installation of the winch bumper, I did mount the fair lead for the winch rope. Also put the front sway bar relocation brackets and front sway bar back on. And then after having a mini heart attack thinking I'd scratched one of the headlights, I went ahead and covered the headlights with some tape. Luckily, it turned out it was just a small smudge. So I do recommend you cover the headlights if you're going to be doing this by yourself. It's a lot easier to keep from damaging a expensive headlight. So while the bumper cover was on the vehicle, I went ahead and placed the templates for the cuts for the high clearance wings. C4 has you print these out and cut them out, and then you just lay a piece of tape that follows the top of one and along the bottom of the other. I wanted to double check the measurements, and they all looked pretty good. I went ahead and put the composite winch line onto the winch for the customer. I thought it'd be neat to make a little video of it spooling up on there. So here's a shot of me installing the step pads on the C4 Fab rock sliders. Customer had these powder coated, so they'd been disassembled and all the hardware had been powder coated as well. So it was pretty much take the screws out, mount the step pads in the proper location, put the screws back in. Driver's side rock slider goes together pretty simply. You do have to take the bolts out of your factory fuel tank skid plate, slide the rock slider mounting bracket between it and the frame, get a couple of the bolts in there loosely to hold the weight of them up, then loosely install the rest of the bolts. Once you get your rock slider positioned where you want it, go through and tighten them all up, starting from the bottom going up. Other than that, very straightforward install on the driver's side. Passenger side rock slider is only slightly more complicated. Same type of thing. They're a little bit heavy and cumbersome, but once you get a bolt or two up there to hold the weight, you can position it however you want. This side does require you to drill 2 holes and run 2 self-tapping bolts through there in the transmission cross member. Other than that, works just like the other side. The vehicle owner also decided to do the full skid package from C4 Fab, so they brought those parts in. We did decide to just do some rattle can spray paint on those, as if they're used like they're supposed to, that will scrape off any kind of coating you could put on. This makes it easier to touch up later on. And since you can't see the top side anyway, once they're bolted on the vehicle, there's no point in spending extra money for powder coat or some kind of exotic coating. Out of the whole project, this is the only part that I was not 100% looking forward to, and that was cutting this bumper for the high clearance wings. The templates they provide are pretty good, but I would recommend that you cut the line extra proud and then go through and trim it back as needed. Even though I cut mine extra wide, I still could have used a little bit more to trim up and make it fit a little closer. C4's instructions recommend that you have a second set of hands when you're doing the high clearance wings, as when you're trying to fit the bumper cover, you do have to bend it and finagle it in there. Luckily for me, I got good buddies that come by. My buddy Jeff came by and helped me with a second set of hands. We pulled this bumper cover on and off several times, trimmed and checked and rechecked and readjusted and trimmed and checked and readjusted some more. So again, thanks to Jeff for that. And we did finally get it fit pretty nice. And here's what it kind of looks like. So I didn't realize that my camera had died as I was putting on the front part of the skid plate, but when we went to restart that, we can see here you start with your front plate, loosely install the mid plate, then the cross member for the transfer case skid, and then as you tighten it up, you start from the back of the vehicle and go toward the front. We had realized we left out 2 bolts and had to come back, loosen some of it up, and redo part of it, but eventually got it all mounted up in a very solid setup. I'm pretty impressed with this piece altogether. So at this point, the suspension is all done, the skid plate is bolted up, the front bumper and high clearance wings are all installed. We're now just reconnecting the TSS radar cruise sensor, hardware for the fender well part of the bumper, and so on. Replacing all the trim panels under the hood, tucked away some wiring for the winch and the front light bar that the customer is going to finish up themselves. So suspension's all finished up, everything's all put back together and appears to be operational. It was time to put the last 2 wheels and tires on and finally put this thing back on the ground. Being an IFS vehicle, when you set it down, it looked to have a whole bunch of camber as the suspension has been at full droop. So I pull it in and out of the shop to kind of let the suspension readjust itself to being on its own weight. A quick drive out of the shop, down the driveway and back in usually does the trick. At this point, all that was left to do was to install the last 2 center caps, of course go through and torque all the lug nuts, and get it a full alignment done. So I took it to the local Toyota shop. I have a guy there that does a really good job with modified alignments, and he took care of that for me. So with the alignment done, I am basically finished with this project. Man, what a beast. I love the way this thing looks. I got to drive it a little bit, and I think it was a huge improvement over a stock one. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. And as usual on YouTube, if you like what you saw, give me a thumbs up. If you don't, give me a comment. Tell me how I can make the videos better. If you want to see what's coming up, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Have a great day.